Hi, and welcome to another Rant Rave review. I have my lovely bookish backdrop. I have my lovely bookish mug. I have my lovely echoey room, which is okay because I watched a bunch of booktubers and they're also echoey. Today I'm going to be talking about nonfiction, one of my favorite nonfiction genres, which there are many, historical parapsychology. And if you don't know what the heck that is, parapsychology is a study of psychics, witches, ghosts, magic. It's 133 in the Dewey Decimal System, for your information, which I knew before I became a librarian because I was always a nerd. So, should you need to know where that is. I don't have the book with me. I often read books either from the library or on my phone as an audiobook, so no pretty covers. But the title of the first one, there's going to be two. The Apparitionists, A Tale of Phantoms, Fraud, Photography, and the Man Who Captured Lincoln's Ghost. So, the reason I'm going to rave about this book is it really, interestingly, weaves together, the author is Peter Manseau, by the way. Peter Manseau, very interestingly, weaves together three seemingly disparate topics. Spiritualism, photography, the history of, and the American Civil War. Which again, you're like, how the heck do those relate? But they do. So let's start with spiritualism. Again, no one knows what the heck I mean when I talk about that. Spiritualism with a capital S is a movement during, it started in the 20s or 40s. The Fox sisters are these two teenage girls who essentially tricked their parents into thinking their house was haunted. And then it boomed into this movement / religion where you gotta talk to the dead, we gotta channel spirits, do seances, have mediums, this whole shebang. It technically still exists. I don't think it's called spiritualism anymore, but it's a thing. So it was a thing. So, and it makes sense if you think about why people would turn to that, because so many people back in the day died. And you want to remember them, and you don't want to forget them or lose them, which relates to photography. I can't remember, one of the people it was talking about in this book who was big in photography, I don't know if his last name was Bell, but I don't know if he was Alexander Graham Bell, which, like the telephone, but similar and or related. One of the early photographers one of the reasons he was really into photography was he was in Washington, D.C., and he was writing a letter to his wife, and he sent it away, and the next day, a letter came for him informing him that she had died several days ago, and he was like, I was writing to her when she was already dead, I wish I could have talked to her, I wish I could have known immediately, or I wish I had a photograph. And that's the thing, so many people wanted some kind of a memento of their family, because they're gonna die someday, and then they're gone. There's even this it's sad, but it's sweet, there's this practice that they used to do where if your infant or your child died, you would take a final portrait of their corpse, and it was meant to be very sweet, from our standpoint, we're that's horrifying, but it was meant to be sweet, it was meant to be a memento, so you could remember them, because again, they're so little, you don't even have any time with them, really. So you have, again, that whole idea of wanting to hold on, and it was interesting because originally photography, you had to sit super still for minutes at a time, or else it would be blurry, but then they got better and better at it, and you didn't have to sit for so long, and you could even go and take pictures of the Civil War. Yeah, okay, so we have spiritualism, we have photography, and now we have the Civil War, where everyone and their uncle is dying left, right, and sideways. Holy cow. If you don't know, if you're not from America, the American Civil War was really, really bloody. Mostly, honestly, because there wasn't a lot of good medicine. People got infections and they lost limbs, and you just time to saw this guy's arm off, and yeah, people died a lot. So, and the whole brother killing brother thing, a civil war does. So you have spiritualism, which in the 1840s was a big thing. And then it kind of died down, and then once the Civil War happened, it spiked. They're everyone's dying. We gotta talk to these people. Which again, in the next book I talk about, you'll see a similar pattern. So spiritualism dies down, war happens, it booms. So people, once again, are doing mediumship and seances and spirit photography. What is spirit photography? Well, the main player of this book, again, I don't remember, I'm not the worst with names. I'm just going to call him the photographer, the spirit photographer. he was a photographer. He was interested in photography. He had a huge crush on his landlady, who was a spirit medium. And possibly by accident, the first time, he took a spirit photograph, which is where it's like someone sitting for a portrait, and then there's like the face of a spirit in the background. And like the landlady's spiritualist medium lady loved it, and as did all of her friends, and he became this huge thing. And he would like make a business out of taking spirit photographs for people to remember their dead loved ones. And again, this is like right during / after the Civil War. And it was a whole thing. Meanwhile, just hold that thought. So this spirit medium guy. Meanwhile, you also have the Civil War happening, and people not tampering with photographs, but tampering with what they're photographing. So you would have, for example, a battlefield with corpses all over it and a fence running through it. They would literally be like, oh, boys, we gotta get like a nice shot for the newspaper, like move all the bodies to this side of the fence, like click. Now it's like, well, everyone's dead, no one's dead. And you're like, holy cow, you're like literally using people's corpses for propaganda, but hey, whatever. Or there was some time where like they found this like, you know, young soldier boy basically shot, and they were like, oh, he doesn't look very good in that position, like move the limbs, click, there you go. Like horrible stuff, horrible. But again, like this is like the early days of photography, and they're like, why wouldn't we do this? YOLO, like you can paint a picture how you want, why not just move the corpse, whatever. They had very different ideas about the dead back in the day, apparently. So this is happening. So you have that kind of manipulation of the truth. And then you have this spirit photographer who's taking spirit photographs. And surprise, surprise, he got brought up on like fraud charges, because here's the thing. If you're really taking photographs of ghosts, whatever, but if you're taking people's money and telling them that you're taking photographs of ghosts and you're not, you're basically making money off of like people who are in mourning, which is horrible. So they had this whole trial about this. Like, P.T. Barnum was even there. P.T. Barnum literally bought photographs from this dude, like, and put them in his stupid museum. And he's like, well, people know they're being fooled when they're in my museum. Hey, I'm P.T. Barnum. Yeah, there's a whole chapter on P.T. Barnum. What a guy. But it was so fascinating because, again, you have this whole trial about you can't manipulate photos, and it's like, people are friggin' manipulating photos all the time. Like, and so it's all about this new bizarre technology and this new weird religion and like the Civil War and how they all affect each other. And it's super interesting. I'm not going to tell you what happened in the trial, but it's cool and you should read it. It's kind of fun and weird and like kind of niche, honestly, but I recommend it if you're into any of those things. If you're into the Civil War, history, spiritualism or parapsychology, fraud, true crime. Fraud can be true crime, yeah. I highly recommend it. It is just a fascinating read. And again, it was a time period I'm not really into the Civil War, but it was cool to learn about it through that like means. Like I find I'm the kind of person where I usually don't care about, I have very specific historical interests, and the Civil War isn't one of them. But if you tack on other things, like I also have a true crime in the Civil War book. If you tack on other topics, I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about the Civil War. This is cool. I'm easily manipulated, I guess. Anyway, so that's that book. I recommend it. The Apparitionists. Book 2. Let's find out what it's called. I'm dying slightly. I do have a cold if I sound weird. That's why. Okay, this one's gonna be super, super rave because I like this one even more. It is called The Witch of Lime Street, Séance, Seduction, and Houdini in the Spirit World. I had a lot of favorite books last year, but it was like up there. It was definitely like one of my favorite. And it is so wild. Like this one, again, it weaves together like a few different things, but in a like really like weird way. This was one of those things where it was about the 1920s. And I hadn't heard of like half of this weird stuff going on. And I feel like we really should. Everyone knows about like, you know, flappers and the Depression. And I'm like, okay, but like some weird stuff happening as well. So, remember spiritualism? How it was like big after the Civil War? Well, then it kind of died down again. And you're like, yeah, spiritualism, whatever. And then you had World War I and it spikes. Yay! Everyone's dying left, right, and sideways. We have to talk to the dead again. Spiritualism's back in a big way in the 1920s. So this is where this one, it's almost like a, it's almost like a little, like, where the Apparitionist ends, like, the Witch of Lime Street picks up. So, this one has 4 different storylines, I guess you could say. And again, it weaves them together. They actually are all connected, but it's still really good. The first one is spiritualism and its current state in the 20s. And again, it weirdly, like, is affected a lot by science and scientific progress. So in this, it's not photography. Now it's radio waves. And everyone's like, radio waves, they move through the ether. The ether. What's the ether? Well, like, maybe spirits move through the ether and psychic powers and the etheric substance. And everyone's, like, losing their minds over this. So it was like, again, like, because radio was becoming such a big thing, spiritualism was like, we want to use that too. And it was a whole thing. So that's like part 1. Actually, along with part 1 is Houdini's part 2. Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame. Yes, that Arthur Conan Doyle. If you don't know, he was like a crazy, full-on hardcore spiritualist, like the St. Paul of spiritualism. He went on multiple cross-continental tours espousing the virtues of spiritualism. The reason why was, I want to say his son, at least his son, if not other relatives, died in the war. So, you know, he's like, well, like, I want to talk to them again. And I forget if it was like a worker of theirs became like a weird spirit medium, or if his wife did, but yeah. So he was full 100% into spiritualism, and he was all about it. Went on these lectures, would talk about how we have to do all this stuff and this and that and the other thing. So yeah, he's part of the spiritualist movement, very much so. Meanwhile, his friend, Harry Houdini, is part 2 of this book. Harry Houdini was a super duper mama's boy, and his mom died. And he really legitimately was like, I would love to hear her voice from like a spirit medium. And Houdini, they met, I forget how they met, but Houdini and Doyle knew each other. And Arthur Conan Doyle set up this seance for them and had the whole, like, it's called automatic writing, where you, like, channel a spirit and you write, the spirit writes through your body or whatever. And the person, how did it work? Houdini's mother only spoke, like, Yiddish or something. I forget what language. And the note that the spirit medium ostensibly wrote from her ghost was in English. And they're like, oh, well, like, there are no languages in Summerland, which is like where spirits live. And Houdini was like, nah, that's not my mom. And he was basically like, he realized, he's like, this is all fake, and you're preying on people who are in mourning. Like, you can't do this. So he, like, as much as like Arthur Conan Doyle loved spiritualism, Houdini hated it. He was like, no, like, you people are frauds. You're making money off of people's like sorrow. That's not okay with me. And again, like, it's interesting because like the whole thing was like, P.T. Barnum, who's like, you know, the con man of America, like total trickster. P.T. Barnum famously was basically, I don't know if he famously said this, but he basically was like, well, people know that they're getting tricked when they come into my stuff. Like, they know they're being fooled, so it's not fraud. Harry Houdini, same thing. It's like he does all these like magic tricks, but he knows it's not magic. Like, that's why you enjoy it, because you're like, how can a normal human do these things? So him being a like magician was like, I am not going to stand for these people like taking advantage of people. No. So that's a thing. So spiritualism. Houdini. Meanwhile, there is this spirit medium named Mina Crandon, aka Marguerite, and she was just this like fancy, wealthy lady who married this doctor. But maybe there's like a CD pass. Haha, you have to read the book to find out what that is. But anyway, she's a fancy, rich lady who married the doctor just for kicks and giggles with her fancy, rich lady friends. Do like a seance, and she's like super good at it, and super good at channeling her older brother who had died, and like has like all kinds of weird phenomenon happening, and she gets more and more famous as a spirit medium. Meanwhile, the 4th part of the book is the Scientific American magazine. Yes, that Scientific American magazine had an actual contest where they were like, we will like give an insane amount of money, prize money, to anyone who can scientifically prove like that they are an actual spirit medium. They had this huge contest, a real, like, yeah. And this is a part that I find super fascinating. So, like, side note, I'm actually writing a book in the very early stages of it about, like, parapsychological stuff. So this part fascinated me. Apparently, like, who knew, in parapsychology there's a hard break between psychics and, like, spiritual stuff in some circles. So in the Scientific American, they had judges, and they had the editor of the magazine and several people from the Society for Psychical Research, psychical, not physical, who were totally believing in psychic powers, but they're like, because they thought it was a physical phenomenon. They're like, yes, psychic powers are a physical phenomenon. We just have to figure out how it works. But all that spirit stuff and contacting the dead, no. Except for, oh my stars, one of them was like, he seemed like a Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney character. He is a man who doesn't believe in a single spirit medium except for his adopted daughter, who, like, he rescued from an abusive household, who's like, he's like, she's the only real spirit medium. And I'm like, what's going on? How are you a real human? Like, how is any of this stuff that actually happened? It all happened in the 1920s, apparently. Like, crazy town. Anywho, so they have, like, a bunch of, I think 4 different judges on their Scientific American panel, plus Houdini, because Houdini can tell you how they're doing their tricks. So they have, and they explain in detail in the book. Poor author, David Jaher, or Jaher, explains in detail how they tested the mediums. For example, apparently, I didn't know this, apparently seances had to be conducted in total darkness, and in order to make sure that there's no chicanery happening, they would have, like, a sensor on the chair to tell if the medium stood up, or they would have little, like, sensors on the wall where on the other side of the wall you had people in a room, like, watching these sensors, and if somebody passed in front of them and, like, blocked the light or whatever, they could tell that someone's moving around. So they had all these different things. It was super interesting. And then you also have Houdini, who, so that was, like, in the darkness, and then there was this one famous medium who, she was, like, the daylight medium, and she would do her seances and such, like, in perfect daylight, and she did this, like, thing, and Houdini was there. He's like, it's sleight of hand, let me explain how you did it. So he's their kind of, like, their check on all these different things. So you have this going on, and you have, like, Marjorie, like, / Mina Crandon, who's, like, she basically decides to join this contest and prove that she's a real medium. And so, like, they went through, the Scientific American went through, like, multiple different mediums, and it's really interesting explaining how they all did their tricks. But then Marjorie is there, and, like, they can't disprove a bunch of stuff that she's doing, and Séance, Seduction, and Houdini in the Spirit World is a title. Like, some of the judges were getting kind of, like, cozy with her, and she's a very, like, interesting lady, and, like, it's really weird and interesting, and just a fascinating read. Super twisty and turny, and again, like, I would classify it as true crime, because fraud's a crime, but it's just interesting. And again, the fact that, like, this is even a thing, like, the Scientific American had a let's find the medium contest. Who knew? It's super interesting. All the parts with Houdini are really interesting. Although Arthur Conan Doyle is not a main player in the book, it does, like, talk about their friendship, and it's really sad but sweet. Okay, so, a long story short, they were friends, but then, like, eventually, as Houdini became more and more against spiritualism, like, they kind of, like, broke their friendship. But at the end, after Houdini died horribly, like, if you know about his death, he left Arthur Conan Doyle a particular item in his will, and it was, like, super sweet to read about. You just have to read the book to see what that is. But as a huge Arthur Conan Doyle fan, I was like, this is beautiful. And someone who's reading about, like, fairies and nonsense, I was like, also beautiful. Anyway, that was super cool. So that's my rave. I'm not sure if I should. Oh, also, if you manage to get the hardcover, which is out of print, unfortunately, the hardcover is glow in the dark. Yeah, that's right. It's automatically a great book if the cover is glow in the dark. So anyway, it's really cool, and you should read it. Highly recommended for anyone who's into spiritualism, parapsychology, fraud, science, history, the 20s, crazy weird stories that are, like, super twisty and turny. You're like, what's going on? Bizarre. I like it. It's niche. Excuse me. My goodness. I'm so tired. yeah, so that's my raves for today, and I hope you enjoy them. I hope you can find them. Give these authors some love because they did a really good job of finding some really obscure, weird details and just telling a fascinating story all around. So, The Apparitionists, The Witch of Lime Street. See you next time.